The theme Secularism. We have two speakers with us, Professor Ranjit Ghose sir in the first session and Professor Hamidulla Marazi sir in the second session. Professor Ghose will be rethinking Indian secularism, and Professor Marazi will be speaking on secularism from a philosophical perspective. Both the talks would be interesting, I hope. We have listened to both the speakers before. Earlier, we had an occasion to listen to Professor Marazi on humanity, and Professor Ghose is a regular participant in the meetings of Philosophy Family. He raises interesting questions, so he is always connected with Philosophy Family. Today, we are there to listen to his entire lecture. Well, we are restricting the talks to 40 minutes so that we can have enough time for discussion. So I request both the speakers to restrict their talks to 40 minutes each. So at least half an hour to 40 minutes we'll be having for discussion of both the lectures after the end of both the lectures. So before inviting Professor Ranjit Ghose and Professor Marazi to deliver the talks, let me have a brief introduction of both the speakers. Well, both the speakers, they don't need any introduction, but as the format goes, a brief introduction is required. Professor Ghose, as we all know, most of us know that he has around 40 to 45 years of teaching experience. He did his doctoral degree from University of Rajasthan, Jaipur. Now he retired as the principal of BJP Autonomous College, Bhubaneswar. He is connected with various academic circles in the state and in the country. He has published two books under the title The Idea of Person, maybe his PhD thesis, and the other book is under the title India Tomorrow. So he is always linked with the academic circles and he is a regular participant in All Odisha Philosophy Association seminars. So welcome, sir. We are very happy that we are going to listen to you your entire lecture. So welcome, sir, and also briefly introduce Professor Hamidullah. Well, as I said, we had an interesting lecture, very good lecture from Professor Marazi on humanity. It's 1.5 months, 2 months back. Now today he will be delivering under the title Secularism from Philosophical Perspective. Professor Marazi too he has got a teaching experience of around 30 years. He taught in JNU, Kashmir University, Central University of Kashmir. Well, his area of specialization includes mostly Islamic philosophy, interreligious dialogue, and comparative religion. So he's an expert in that area, and he's a member of various bodies on interreligious dialogues and all that. So he's very much involved in that area. So we are happy to have him. At present, he is working as professor and as also and he's having a charge of dean of School of Social Sciences, Central University of Kashmir. So he will be delivering his lecture on secularism from philosophical perspective. So he would be delivering in the second session. So in the first session, we have Professor Ranjit Ghose sir. Well, I welcome both the speakers. Now, at first, I would like to welcome Professor Ranjit Ghose sir to deliver his lecture on under the title Rethinking Indian Secularism. Welcome, sir. Over to Dr. Ghose for his lecture. Welcome, sir. Welcome both the sirs, and I also welcome The senior professors present here, Professor Dhaneswar Sao sir and others, Anuruddha Ponda sir and others who are present here, and welcome all the participants, and I also welcome our host and the coordinator and the admin of Philosophy Family to this webinar. With a warm welcome to all. I welcome Professor Ghose to address his lecture. Over to Professor Ghose. Sir, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. I must give thanks to the Philosophy Family, the organizers, to invite me to deliver this lecture on rethinking Indian secularism. And I also welcome my co-speaker, Professor Hamidulla, and also my friend Dhaneswar Sao is there, and other seniors are there. Professor Sesatri is there, and many other senior teachers of philosophy are there. Now, before starting I am very much aware of the time schedule, the stipulation. So for that reason, instead of giving an extempore lecture which may extend to this side or that side direction, I have noted it, and I will read the paper which I have written on rethinking Indian secularism. It will hardly take 30 minutes, I presume. Now, prior to that, as a prelude to this, I want to go back to some 30 to 35 years back. And I wrote two articles. One was in national integration, reality or an ideal. And the other one was religion, fundamentalism, and Indian culture. And these two papers were published in Viswabharati Journal of Philosophy. And subsequently, these two papers were incorporated in my book. I have published very few books. that may be one of my drawback. In any case, these two articles are incorporated in that book, India Tomorrow, Essays on Ethics and Society. And this was also published a decade back. So nothing has changed over this 30 to 35 years so far as the discussion of secularism, fundamentalism, all these things are concerned. So this is definitely a very volatile ideology, I should say. And for that reason, we have to rethink about its continuance in the Indian context. And that is my submission, which I will present in my paper. So let me start. The modern man is living in an age of ideology. He is confronted with several ideologies like nationalism, communism, humanism, feminism, and secularism. However, more often than not, he experiences a great hue and cry associated with the ideology of secularism. In the Indian context, the concept secular and the theory secularism both have given rise to many debatable issues associated with them during the post-independent India. When we search for a solution to this persistent problem of Indian society and governance, it appears as if secularism stands on a shifting sand of time. The more we try to cure the symptoms associated with it, cure the symptoms associated with its non-compliance, they tend to subside, but the problem remains as ever. Hence, a serious look is necessitated to rethink on India's model of secularism. Secularism is the hallmark of every democratic state. As a simple ideology, there should not be any conflict in the understanding of its meaning. Every modern state ought to separate the state activities and governance from the existing religious practices. The state has to establish a uniform civil code basing on which the right to equality amongst all citizens has to be maintained. In a multi-religious country which aspires to inculcate these democratic values, the automatic exclusion of the different personal laws become a necessity per se. Since these minimum requirements of a democratic state are not traceable in practice, it becomes an urgent necessity to rethink the Indian version of secularism by bringing forth the situations where it failed by entering into a much greater debate as to whether in the Indian context the nomenclature secular state is at all necessary. Let us first discuss the fundamental principles of secularism. The term secular refers to being separate from religion or having no religious base. Secularism is an ideology of indifference or rejection or exclusion of religion and religious considerations. It means separation of religion from political, economic, social, and cultural aspects of life. Religion should be treated only as a personal matter. Secularism provides full freedom to all religious tolerance, to all religions and tolerance of all religions. There should not be any discrimination and partiality on the grounds of religion. Secularism is one of the most prized possessions of a democratic state. It provides the following benefits to the citizens at large. 1. Religious freedom. People have unrestricted freedom to follow a religion of their choice and pursue their own belief. 2. Fair decision making. As the state provides equal treatment to all religions, no religious community can put pressure on the state to make decision in their favor. This is known as institutional separation. 3. Freedom of speech. Ideology of secularism ensures people to express their opinion and beliefs freely. No religious group can apply pressure or dominance. These three requirements work because of the common ground, which is the separation of the state authorities and institutions from religious authorities and institutions. Secularism is categorized into hard and soft. Hard secularism considers religious propositions to be epistemologically illegitimate and seeks to deny them as much as possible. Marxists belong to this creed and holds the view religion means nothing at all. The soft variety emphasizes tolerance and liberalism. These two categories are reflected in three types of secularism, which are known as political secularism, philosophical secularism, and socio-cultural secularism. We shall now give an exposition of two versions of secularism, that is Western and Indian. The discussion of Western version comes first, as secularism was coined by George Jacob Hoeleke for the first time in the year 1851. The emergence of this theory in the West witnessed a series of historical turmoils. The conflict of church and state in the medieval Europe led to a Protestant Reformation by Luther and Calvin, which ultimately resulted in Renaissance and Enlightenment. This also helped in the development of rationalism, humanism, and scientific outlook, and also an utilitarian philosophy. Western secularism is based on the principle of separation of state and religion. It is possible, as every citizen has the right to follow any religion of their choice. In the Western democracies, state and religious groups should function as per the rule of law. Political parties are not supposed to use agenda based on religious or racial considerations. America and France strictly follow the policy of separation of religion from politics and do not interfere in the religious activities of any religion. In the Indian context, the modern history of secularism dates back officially to 1976, when, by the 42nd Amendment to the Constitution of India, the word secular was included in the preamble to the Constitution of India. Since our concern is the discussion of Indian secularism, we shall first go back to its genesis, which we shall name as secularistic interpretation of history of India. Secondly, we shall discuss the philosophy of Indian secularism. And thirdly, we shall discuss the reality and threats in the application of secularism in India. Finally, we shall propose a futuristic alternative. Secularistic interpretation of history of India, or historical secularism. Secular tradition are deep-rooted in 5,000 years history of India. Indian culture is based on the blending of various spiritual traditions and social movements. In ancient India, the timeless Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, was basically allowed to develop a holistic religion by welcoming different spiritual traditions within its fold. The development of four Vedas and the various interpretation of the Upanishads and Puranas highlight the religious plurality of Hinduism. In the 3rd century BC, Emperor Ashoka made an appeal not only for the toleration of all religious sects, but also to develop a spirit of great respect towards them. Even after the advent of Jainism, Buddhism, and later Islam and Christianity on the Indian soil, the quest for religious toleration and coexistence of different faiths continued. In the medieval India, Sufi and Bhakti movements tied the people of various communities together with love and peace. To name a few are Kabir, Nanak, Tukaram, and Moinuddin Chishti. Religious toleration and freedom of worship marked the kingdom of Akbar, abolition of jizya. He also promulgated Din-e-Ilahi, or the divine faith, which had elements of both Hindu and Muslim faith. Spirit of secularism is found in the initial stage of freedom movement with the liberals like Firoz Shah Mehta, Govind Ranade, and Gopal Krishna Gokhale. However, the Britishers pursued their policy of divide and rule and became instrumental to destroy the secular fabric of India. By bringing the partition of Bengal 1905, they brought separate rules for Muslims, Sikhs, and Christians by the Act of 1909, 1932, and 1935. In this context, we have to discuss those thinkers who have made significant contribution to the concept of secular in their specific interpretation of it. They are Sri Aurobindo, Tilak, and Savarkar. In India, we come across three indigenous ideologies, and they are Swaraj, Sarvodaya, and Hindutva. The ideology of Swaraj gained importance during the pre-independence era, and the Gandhian ideology of Sarvodaya and Tilak Savarkar's ideology on Hindutva gained importance in the post-independent India. Moreover, during the latter stage of freedom movement, we find the views of Gandhi and Nehru on secularism. Gandhi's secularism is based on a commitment to the brotherhood of religious communities based on their respect for and pursuit of truth. Whereas Nehru's secularism was based on a commitment to scientific humanism associated with progressive view of social change. Then let us discuss the philosophy of Indian secularism. Let us now discuss a bit on Hinduism and Hindutva. The term Hinduism did not exist before 1830. It was created by the English colonialists. Similarly, the term Hindustan was first used by Muhammad Ghori in the 12th century, who dubbed his new subjects as Hindus. Hinduism is a blanket term covering several religions and does not refer to a single religion. It is a heterogeneous religion and consists of many schools of thought. Hinduism has no ecclesiastical order, no centralized religious authorities, no governing body, no prophets. Gandhi eulogized the glorious Catholicity of Hinduism. In his Essence of Hinduism, Gandhi writes, I quote, "One may be polytheistic or monotheistic, monistic or pantheistic, even an agnostic, atheist or humanist, and still be considered a Hindu. A man may not believe in God and still can call himself a Hindu." This essence of Hinduism was also emphasized by Tilak and later on by Savarkar. They named it as Hindutva, which has become one of the most prominent indigenous ideologies. Along with this, Aurobindo emphasized upon the timeless Sanatan Dharma. In giving his worldview of Sanatan Dharma, he claimed that the rise and fall of Sanatan Dharma is the rise and fall of India. For him, Shodharma and Rashtradharma are identical, as they are not antithetical. Hindutva is Hinduness or quality of being a Hindu. Hindu identity is cultural, geographical, and not religious. The ontology and epistemology of Indian religions are one. There is only a communitarian difference between them. Hindutva is not dharma-centric. It is not surprising, therefore, a personality like Ambedkar, who took an oath not to die as a Hindu, accepted Savarkar's view of Hindutva. Recently, Supreme Court of India established Hindutva is a secular way of life in response to the pseudo-secularists of our country. It is a sorry state that the liberal and tolerant features of Hinduism has to be recognized by judicial decisions. Without stretching this issue further, let us point out three important features of Indian secularism. Number one, Indian secularism, and the term secularism is similar to the Vedic concept of dharma nirapekshata, which symbolizes the indifference of state to religion. This concept is found in the Western model of secularism, where the governance is completely separate from religious matters by establishing a separation of church and state, the sacred and the profane. 2. Philosophy of secularism is based on Sarva Dharma Sambhava, which means the path followed by all religions is same, though the paths themselves may be different. This theory is found in the philosophies of Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, and Gandhi, and reflects the dominant ethos of Indian culture. This may be ascribed as positive secularism. Thirdly, Indian secularism is not an end in itself. It is a means to establish religious plurality in order to establish a peaceful coexistence of different religions. Then comes one of the important discussions of this evening, and that is loopholes and aftermaths. The different features of Indian secularism are not realizable in practice. In the West, religion and politics operate in two separate domains and do not intervene in each other's affair. The West maintains a complete separation of religion and state in the strict sense of the term. But in India, when we discuss secularism, this type of segregation and demarcation do not exist in theory and practice. In criticizing this situation, historian Ian Copeland writes, I quote, "Protestant conception of religion is essentially a private affair with which states had no legitimate business, was never going to work in a country where rulers and religious publics have been interacting from time immemorial. It was better not to use the term at all than to use it fraudulently." In India, the intervention is possible through a settled parameter of judiciary because the Constitution of India allows extensive state interference in religious affairs. In India, there are many sectors where it becomes necessary for the state to intervene. Some of them are as follows. 1. The practice of sati or widow burning, dowry, animal sacrifice, divorce, and preventing Dalits from entering temples. Government even allows different religious endowments, makes provisions for religious pilgrimage, and provides aid to different minority groups to establish schools, madrasas, etc. The aftermath of different concessions, these different concessions lead to different threats to the application of secularism in India and ask for a serious rethinking on its efficacy. Some of them are as follows. 1. Mingling of religion and politics. 2. Communal politics and communal riots. 3. Competitive politicization. 4. Rise of Hindu nationalism to counter Muslim fundamentalism. 5. National identity versus religious identity. 6. Majoritarian nationalism versus cultural nationalism. And lastly, preferred distance versus equidistance. I have only tried to find out these 7. There may be many if we go on discussing on this issue. More specifically, the issue of Hindutva deserves a serious rethinking as an ideology in the 21st century India. The funniest situation is that the detractors of this ideology supports Hinduism instead of Hindutva. They are the leftist intellectuals who should have supported a form of hard secularism, like Marx. Some Muslim liberal thinkers named them as pseudo-secularists who are mostly pro-Muslim and anti-Hindu. However, the topology and typology of Hindutva is considered as Triloko-Vyakti, and because it is not dharma-centric in nature. Sociologist Dipankar Gupta, in his online article, Hindutva, the great nationalist ideology, declares, I quote, "The future of Bharat is set. Hindutva is here to stay. It is up to the Muslims whether they will be included in the new nationalist spirit of Bharat." Unquote. So the last section where I give my own version of such a situation. In such a jinx situation, what we want is complete religious neutrality in the Western sense of the term for India. We want a total dharma nirapekshata by the state because the concept of sarva dharma samanata has failed in its application because of the electoral politics, which is mostly based on minority appeasement. The vast majority of the Hindus are being ignored at the cost of their constitutional rights. That is Article 26. There are obvious violations also of Article 15. It has now become an imperative for Indians to drop the word secular from the Constitution of India, as it has generated more confusion than clarity in its application. Several PILs have been filed in the Supreme Court to withdraw the word secular from the preamble to the Constitution. This requires a long legal process, but the need of the hour is a complete separation of state and religion in India. India cannot bear the load of constitutional secularism anymore. To conclude, let us all hope that the emergent India, with the fulfillment of much cherished value of Bharatiyata, which entails a cultural nationalism within a pluralistic worldview, can change our communal outlook into a communitarian outlook, and that will be the India of our dream. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghose, for your nice lecture. So it's you have not only discussed the facets of secularism, you have tried to make your own viewpoint on the issue. As you see, secularism as a concept is very volatile, and it has given rise to more of confusion than clarity. So you, as you see, that you have suggested three things that is important. That various PILs have been lodged in the Supreme Court for taking out the word secular from the preamble. Number one. Number two, you more or less you talk of having a uniform civil code throughout the country, and third, I see that there should be a total religious neutrality. As I see from your suggestions for seeing Indian standpoint, and these are the suggestions as we make out towards the end for a future for the future, a guideline for the future. So thank you, sir, for your lecture. I'm not synopsizing; a lot of discussion will be there. Okay, so I now request Professor Marazi to address his lecture. Thank you, Dr. Ghose, for a nice lecture and your viewpoint. Thank you. Over to Dr. Marazi for his lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Rasa. First of all, I should thank Philosophy Family for arranging such a important and stimulating discussion on the subject, which needs a lot of consideration from different points of view. Here, I will be not discussing the secularism which is being nowadays practiced at different parts of the world, but I just am more interested in its philosophical foundations, where from the concept has come. because we have to make a difference between Oriental approach and the Western approach to all these issues, whether it is humanity or whether it is secularism or whether it is religion or it is philosophy. As I have already discussed in my talk on humanity, that there are different perspectives on this subject, and there is no one rubric for these all, isms or philosophies. To be honest, we have to go a long way to understand ourselves what we mean by secularism, because as has been said by Professor Ranjit Ghose, that there's a lot of confusion, and in most cases this term is being used in the political terminology rather than in its philosophical connotations or other such type of worldly connotations. Mostly it is being considered as a political concept rather than philosophical concept. But my interest is more in its being a philosophical concept than any religious or political concept. So to start with, I can say that secular means worldly rather than spiritual, and not specifically related to religion or to a religious body, as we know the term secular music. And this is also connotation of it is that secular means not to be bound by monastic restrictions, especially not belonging to a religious order used by the clergy. Secular humanism and such type of other philosophies that advocate human rather than religious values. Secularism in this way will mean religious skepticism or indifference. Second, the view that religious considerations should be excluded from civil affairs. So this has been also one meaning which has been given to this term by the people of lexicography. And secularism means to lift the monastic restrictions from a member of the clergy. This is also one of the meaning which has been given to it by the American Heritage Dictionary, a very important topic on this subject. So let us try to see how philosophers have seen it in different ages and different times. As we know that the church had a sway on the politics in the Middle Ages, and that was considered by Hobbes as the kingdom of darkness. And why we call this the new era which started, Renaissance or Enlightenment, because they considered the period which was dominated by church as Dark Ages, because that was opposing science, philosophy, rationalism, and all such type of tendencies. So for that reason, there was a reaction against that type of control by church on all affairs of life, including philosophy and science and other moral aspects. And this reaction was natural in many ways, because several things which were not basically religion, those were being presented as religious, although those were something else than religious. So this was the problem also with the church fathers, and they used to control even the land as well as the minds of the people, and the Inquisitions were very famous in that respect. So Hobbes' theory of sovereignty brings to completion the process of subordinating the church to the civil power, and he reaches to the logical conclusion, that is the separation of the spiritual and temporal authorities. And for a materialist like Hobbes, the spiritual becomes a mere ghost. He would talk like that, a figment of the imagination. He does not deny that there is something as revelation and as spiritual truth, but he is clear that there is nothing to say about them. So he says that we can't talk about that. There may be some concept of revelation, and which has been held by people, but we can't say anything about that. So the very belief in non-material substances he refused, he just regarded as a cardinal error derived from Aristotle and propagated by the clergy for their own advantage. So this was his view about this. It is the metaphysical side of the other cardinal error. They believe that the church is the kingdom of God, and so endowed with an authority other than that of the state. So this he held like this. It is the duty of the church to teach, but he adds that no teaching is lawful unless the sovereign authorizes it. So this was also very important. So in this way, we have to control even this teaching. In every sense that counts, religion is completely under the sway of law and government in the sight of Hobbes. Religion is not very vital matter to Hobbes at all. Freedom of conscience as an intellectual, he calls it as intellectual confusion. This has been mentioned by many scholars who have written on Hobbes. And then John Milton, so he thought that scripture is the rule of faith. Every man must interpret scripture for himself. So this is a very important point. Church should not enforce belief in a particular and its particular interpretation. Individual conscience is the very court of last resort, and no one believes what he does not like to believe. Church has its role, but it has to deal only with the spiritual. State has to talk about other aspects. So in this way, we have to just get instructions from church, but those are not to be necessarily to be accepted by the state as well. So far as Locke is concerned, I will just discuss some more details about all these philosophers, but just for the preliminary discussion on the subject, because we need to understand, as students of philosophy, we have not to digress from our actual mandate. That is, we are philosophers, we are thinkers, and we have to think philosophically and try to come up with some tangible solutions to the problems, rather than also become part of the propaganda which is being perpetrated on different type of ideologies and philosophies. So Locke advocated a theory of almost universal toleration, and he said that there should be practical separation between church and state. His whole intellectual temper was secular to a degree. He was indifferent to theological disputations. Personally, he was religious, and ethically, he was Christian. Locke was profoundly, he was reasonable and anti-dogmatic. So you can have different type of, personal, touches to these subjects, and your approach can be different at one and the same time. And that has happened with the Western philosophers in most cases. And then when we talk about Machiavelli, he does not support that a ruler must believe in the religion of his subjects or practice their virtues. So we know in his prince he has advocated that rulers can even use religion for his political gains and to garner more and more support. He sanctioned the use of immoral means by the rulers to govern as an end. He thinks that the ruler is outside the group and is above the morality to be enforced within the group. He was, single-handedly interested in political power and indifferent to other things. So his main goal was to have the ruler should have full control and he should get power. And he was not very much interested in other aspects, whether it's religion or something else. Even he had even advocated that even religion can be used for gaining political power. And as according to his perception, it breeds drowsiness and it can be used for one's political ambitions. Hegel was he was a little bit not very much clear about all these aspects, and he believed in three intelligence, and he thought that Greeks and the deeper moral and religious insights of the Christianity are there. However, he found Christianity intellectually decadent when compared with the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle. Yet he was convinced also that Christianity brought to Western culture a depth of spiritual experience which Greek philosophy lacked. He realized that the philosophy and religion of Athens was an inseparable part of the whole moral of life in the city-state, and the mysticism, pessimism, and word weariness of the Christianity. So far as Marx is concerned, we talked clearly about religion, that it is the opium of masses, it is the heart of heartless, soul of soulless, it is the sigh of the oppressed, and it is the opium of masses. So materialism meant for Marx as it has constrained to man for Marx and anti-religious secularism, regarded as the precondition of the thoroughgoing social reform. And Augustine and Aquinas set the terms of the debate between Christian and non-Christian culture, but they were not secularists. They both, however, used the word secular and seculum frequently. These two doctors of the church spoke to the problem of the relationship of reason to faith, which also concerned Rousseau, Kant, and Hegel, as well as to the church and state issue. Other thinkers, Dante, Machiavelli, Locke, Rousseau, and Marx, criticized papal power and the role of religion in politics, which is certainly a development of the secular doctrine. Secularism was, of course, a strong component of French revolutionary ideology, which spread over Europe after 1789, that even Hegel's and Marx's ideas indelibly. The last thinkers we consider Dostoevsky and others, they reaped the results of centuries of this anti-religious criticism, and in their works linked secularism to the scourge of communism by prophecy and experience, respectively. Both were sharp critics of secularism. They vindicated the rights of religion, which was no longer the persecutor, but the persecuted. The Middle Ages from 400 to 1300 witnessed the victory of the sacred over the secular, but ever since then, the sacred has been in erotic retreat, often led by the intellectuals. The church fathers relied on faith over reason, the sacred over the secular. Thus, Augustine's Pindus, Covarrubias, intellectuals, faith-seeking understanding meant that one must believe in order to know, which in the 11th century was epitomized by Anselm of Canterbury as a credo ad intelligam. I believe that I may understand. So this debate also continued, but in the high Middle Ages, from 1100 to 1300, that elements of modern rationalism began to stir. Thomas Aquinas created two parallel system treatises, one of reason, Summa Contra Gentiles, and other of faith, Summa Theologica, while the division was not watertight. In the first, he relied mostly on classical pre-Christian sources and also Islamic sources, and in the second, mostly on the Christian theological ones. In other words, he recognized a distinction between reason and revelation. It was momentous. He differed from Descartes, who would parenthesis, he did not open even though he accepted its contents. This respectful suspension by Descartes is secularism in that it segregates religion from philosophy. But Aquinas was the first to make the distinction, the difference being that for him theology was knowledge, a superior knowledge to boot, albeit knowledge based on and other principles, namely revelation. The centuries after Aquinas, the Renaissance centuries, show a further gulf separating reason from religion, represented by an ever more powerful papacy and the emerging state represented by the Western and medieval monarchs, the Renaissance state, and the ailing Holy Roman Empire. The focus that changes from the Thomist reason and revelation, which shaped Dante's Divine Comedy, to the relation of church and state. Both Dante and Machiavelli's views are examples of pre-Reformation challenges to papal temporal power. The Protestant Reformation is the key backdrop to modern secularism. For Luther tied personal salvation to scripture, sola scriptura, and faith sola fides, rather than to church authority or good works. But it did not produce a consensus. Not only did Luther break with the Catholic Church, but his followers and imitators broke with him and with each other. The result was the splintering of Christendom and the establishment of a religiously plural Europe and America, the source of our present-day diversity and secularism, which accommodates many individual consciences, but it does so with a continuing splintering that necessarily makes any kind of religious unity and community seem remote. Such religious divisions ultimately lead to the repression of outward expression of religious sentiments in contemporary society, lest they elicit discord. This repression is one of the key manifestations of secularism. Voltaire noted in his letters on England that Muslims, Christians, and Jews get along fine at the stock exchange where religious affiliations are irrelevant. There one ratchets down to a lower common denominator where men can presumably live without conflict, but we would add also without much meaning. The Enlightenment can be characterized by several things: reason, reform, critical separate hostility towards revealed religion. We look at it from the perspective of autonomy and individualism. It has been convincingly argued and documented that the skepticism of the 16th and 17th centuries, most notably that Michael Montaigne 1518 to 1585, was the result of Catholic-Protestant controversy and war. John Locke concluded after viewing with the dismay the secularism of the English civil wars of the 1640s, quote, "Everyone is orthodox to himself, and that government should therefore not meddle in religion. Religion would thus develop upon the individual. There could be no public faith, neither of Christendom nor of a nation, because no church, he felt, could claim to be the true church without a rival nullifying its claim. Self-reliance or autonomy then became a watchword of the Enlightenment." Rousseau advocated in the Social Contract a Roman Republican religion for the state, relegating inner religiosity, that of the gospel, a religion of man, to the individual. The former, though politically useful, could satisfy man's religious yearnings no more than could a parade. The autonomous individual must see God in another, more spiritual domain. To achieve this, Rousseau, like many of his generation, eliminated revelation and miracles. Any divine constraint in the world was impossible. Man was really autonomous. The gospel for him, as for Jefferson and other deists, was an unmatched compendium of moral truths, not a revelation of God's mysteries or commands. Indeed, Rousseau's moral and political theory is based on obedience to oneself. The medieval Spanish Arab had advanced the notion of a double truth, one for philosophy, one for theology. These truths contradicted each other, yet each was true in its proper domain. Aquinas, on the contrary, insisted on the unity of truth, since God, the author of truth, cannot contradict himself. Averroes' doctrine of the double truth can be found in the Enlightenment, particularly in Voltaire, who advocated belief in God for his servants but felt free to doubt his existence himself. Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, 1781, and Critique of Practical Reason, 1788, follow an Averroistic train of thought. In the first critique, Kant argues that God's existence and that of after life and freedom of the will cannot be indisputably cannot be proven. In the second critique, he argues that those same beliefs are necessary to live a moral life. It is quite likely, however, that any readers who pride themselves in intellectual integrity will eschew such a practicability and conclude that there is very little reason to believe in God. Like Hume, Kant is a crucial source of modern atheism and agnosticism. He is also the inspiration of 19th and 20th century European Protestantism, which shifts more and more of the onus of the Christian credibility to faith and inwardness as opposed to what is regarded as Catholic dogmatism and externalism. Kant's critiques themselves are more secular than atheistic. The double truth lets him refute theism and then endorse it on different grounds, a subtle secular solution. The impact of the refutations of God, morality, and freedom in the critique of pure reason has been historically more influential than their disclaimers and qualifications in the critique of pure practical reason. The split between the two sundered the unity of inherited philosophical thought. In the second, titled The Dialectical Upward and Downward, Hegel converts the Kantian antinomies or contradiction into a dialect that restores the importance of externality and objectification. Hegel, for his part, stresses that the idea never fulfills itself until it comes into conflict with its antithesis and rises up to a new level. Thus, the Enlightenment and the French Revolution laid too much emphasis on individual reason and right, which led to anarchy. They can only be made viable when they are solidified in a viable state. For Hegel, the state takes the place of the church, which in his philosophy of right, 1821, is morally and institutionally subsumed by the state. This exceeds the Lutheran subordination of the church to the state. What is noteworthy, Hegel and his follower Marx, is that all confidence in redeeming man has shifted from the church to the state, and that the nature of this redemption itself becomes wholly secular. It mirrors the numerous secularizations of church lands by the state throughout revolutionary and Neoplatonic and Neopolonic Europe. Hegel believes that man's fulfillment is reached not only through transcendence of contradictions and objectification in institutions, but also through a growth of self-consciousness at each step. The result in Hegel is to bring God's existence to reside exclusively in human consciousness, which as absolute spirit then takes his place. When Hegel writes of Christ's incarnation, one is left wondering whether God became man or man became God. Indeed, one of his followers wished he would speak more clearly of God as a really existent thing and not just a thought in human consciousness. The problem has been described as philosophy comprehending theology, or reason understanding God, the possibility of which Christian philosophers, medieval as well as modern, have been loath to admit. Aquinas had thought one could demonstrate God's existence but not understand his essence. Marx disliked Hegel's spiritualization of reality and steered toward pure materialism during his studentship in Berlin in the 1830s. The elements of his dialectical materialism and inversion of Hegel's spiritual dialectic are well known. Shifting his emphasis from separate to human society, he sees the real cause of human alienation and misery to spring from the conflict of social classes, the dominant ones exploiting those underneath. Private property, of course, was one root of the problem, but religion was a less noticed one. Religion segregates humanity into denominations instead of uniting it on the basis of species being or what one holds in common with one species. Private property and sectarian religion both alienate the individual from humanity. For Marx, the solution is common property. In his 1843 article on the Jewish question, he argues for the abolishment of religion rather than for the establishment of a common one. This measure was incorporated, of course, by communist governments in the 20th century. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 marks the apogee of secularism because human ascension was then based not according to what is highest beliefs and religion, but according to what is lowest physical existence. In this way, there are so many other scholars like Auguste Comte and Hugo and George Sand and others who have also talked like this. And then Nietzsche would reach the opinion that God, has been removed from the world, and Dostoevsky was dogmatized some of its consequences in a novel called Demons of the Possessed. In the book, a provincial town observes atheism with professional revolutionism. Hegelianism and the latest intellectual fashions from the West are trumped by an underground revolutionary network that finally torches part of the town and murders some of its inhabitants. The novel, which captures mid-century Russian populism and nihilism, can be seen as a prophecy of the totalitarianism. Dostoevsky's Slavophile novels are among the first and most powerful critique of Western secularism. So after discussing all these ideas about secularism from medieval times to present times, then we have Bertrand Russell and then existentialists and others. So I can say that so far as a philosophy, this secularism has been presented as the triumph of reason over faith. This is the problem with the West, but so far as East is concerned, as Professor Ghosh has mentioned some of these aspects in the Indian context, this concept of secularism has never existed in the East at all. So religion has been intertwined with all the activities of man, whether epistemological, philosophical, economic, political, and whatever activities there have been. So in this way, we have to differentiate between the philosophical connotations of secularism and its practical implications. And in our part of the world, East Asian part of the world, secularism has been considered that not interfere in the personal affairs of any religious community, rather than triumph of reason over faith. So faith has been accepted by the Oriental concept of, religions, and it has been given the, chance to flourish, but not interfere in the public affairs of the people. So in this way, if we see from the Islamic point of view, so Islam also has just tolerated other religions. For example, not only tolerated, but even they have been given, freedom. For example, in Medina, there were the Jews in the first stage, that there was Misak Medina, where the Jews and Muslims lived together, and then they started the first, constitution, which is known as the first constitution, written constitution of the world, where Jews and Muslims were considered a community or a nation. So in this way, we have such type of examples from, doctrinal point of view, and also the practical point of view, where the different kind of non-interference in the religious affairs of others has been practiced by the Asian, I should say, different type of governments in different parts of the world, as has been mentioned by Professor Ranjit. So far as Ashoka was concerned, Akbar was concerned, and then we have also Zain al-Abidin in Kashmir, and then there have been so many other rulers who have never tried to interfere in the affairs of other religions. Rather, they have allowed other religions to flourish, but they never interfere in their religious matters and the matters which pertain to conscience. So in this way, there we have to try to understand there are two paradigms of secularism. One is based on the philosophical connotations, when people turned against the church and then they started falsifying everything of religion. And there was a type of revolt against religion, and secularism was considered to be the triumph of reason over faith, where faith has no role, but reason and philosophy and science has to dictate terms. But in the context of East, so religion has been never, a hurdle in the way of science or culture or any rule even many times. So we have to make this difference between these two paradigms of secularism, Eastern and Western. In the Western, it was mostly philosophical in nature, but in the Eastern part of the world, it was maybe sometimes agnostic. There were agnostics like, Buddhists, and then there were also some other people who were agnostics. But they have never just tried to impose their own philosophies or own their views on any other religious community. So in this way, we can make this difference between these two type of paradigms from the Western and Eastern point of view. But one point which is very important, on which I will like to end, is that this has worked in a nice way in the Eastern part of the world. And when there are faith societies and multicultural societies to impose one faith on other communities or the values on other communities will lead definitely to disruption and conflict, and that will be disastrous for the communal harmony of the communities wherever they live. And this has been not the practice of the East at all in any age. There may be some sporadic examples, but people have been living peacefully. And I will end with this saying of Nehru: the only alternative to coexistence is co-destruction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your yet another nice lecture, the second in the philosophy family. So, two things before I invite, let me tell two things, good things that you have said, that you have attached secularism with the worldly affairs rather than the spiritual or the religious affairs, number one. And you have attached, you have focused secularism more on the human values rather than the religious values. Then you talked of non-imposition of any format on another format. Third, and most vital, that any sort of cushioning from one religious standpoint on a secular format is something which must be cushioned again. So these are the things that mostly that comes from your lecture, and you have taken this secular scheme to look into from the ancient, medieval, and the modern philosophical standpoints, and you have tried to finally address your position that secular, as far as religion is concerned, it is a personal affair, and any religion or even the state has no right to interfere in one's personal affairs, and there should be a sort of individual liberty as far as religion is concerned, or the state versus individual life is concerned. So there should be religious neutrality from the standpoint of the state, and there should be religious freedom from the standpoint of the individual. And you have tried to see this from a philosophical perspective through the ages, and very nicely you have said towards the last that in the East there is more of harmony. Well, even though there is a multi-cultural or multi-religious the Eastern side, Eastern world, but still there is more of harmony. Well, there may be sporadic instances, but this should not be generalized. There is more of harmony, there is more of understanding between religions in the Eastern world. Thank you, sir, for your nice lecture, and you have tried to see this from a philosophical angle. Thank you very much. So now, well, if I look into the chat box, I can find questions from P. Sisadri. Well, sir, if you want to say something directly, or should I ask this question directly? Would you like to speak, sir, Professor Sisadri? Yes.
Yeah, I will.
Yes, sir. Welcome.
I would like to speak, but I just recently read an article in Times of India, speaking tree by Judge Suraya, the enigma, deciphering the enigma of departure. I get a feeling sometimes that our secularism has been defined predominantly by the concept of fear. And fear is something that is ingrained in our consciousness from childhood. Whether it is fear of God, elders, fear of animals, whatever it is. And secularism, as has been practiced, I was born after independence, so I was brought up in that culture where secularism was restricted only to religion. After hearing both of you, I get this feeling that we need to redefine secularism more from an ethical standpoint than a religious standpoint. Primarily, secularism doesn't make any sense to a person who doesn't get anything to eat. There are people who don't have the basic conditions of living a daily life. For them, religion, secularism makes no sense at all. And as Professor Marazi pointed out, religion has been a dominating factor with the governments, with social administrators, with the common people throughout human history, because every clash of civilization has been either from economic point of view or religious point of view. And the dominant group wins. Today, we don't live in such a state of dominant religious or dominant economic groups. Society is different today. We have got intellectual group, a global citizenry. And this global citizenry is not concerned with secularism or religion at all. I feel we need to redefine secularism, but I agree on one thing. We need the separation as practiced by, I have seen it in Australia and in Europe. I have not been to America. Two things stand out. No government, a secular government, cannot help, promote, or encourage the religious sentiment of any one group at the cost of other groups, in the name of minorities, in the name of caste. Secularism has to go beyond religion. It will take knock of religion and consider only, in my opinion, the economic standpoint of well-being of everyone, health, education, food, shelter. Only then we can have some basis to talk of secularism. This is my personal view, and I would like both the scholars to enlighten me further on this. Thank you.
Professor Professor Marazi, well, please, yes. Please
Ghose may first start, or I should start.
Well, you start, sir.
Okay.
I am prepared for both.
I am happy that, Professor Sadri Saab, after a long time I have seen him. So he had sent an article for my book that was published long back. So it was nice to see you again, sir.
Okay.
So your observation was really very, important that when you don't have anything to eat, so you are not concerned about secularism and anything else. Basically, if the states are welfare states, then they will not talk in terms of religion or, denominations. They'll be more concerned with the welfare of the people and to mitigate their sufferings rather than talking about such issues which may be controversial or there may be two or more opinions about that. And those matters relate to conscience. And matters of conscience are very dear to each and every denomination. So those things, if these are being, started and debated by the rulers, then they may create more fissures in the society rather than solve the problems of people. But in the welfare society and welfare state, we expect that people who are at the helm of affairs, they will be concerned with the mitigating of the sufferings of the people, because that is their Raj Dharam. That is their basic duty, to support the people who are the marginalized, who are poor, who are suffering. Otherwise, if we just start debating this issue and that issue instead of addressing the actual problems of the people, so that will be definitely, not of any interest to the person who are suffering. So if we are really, serious about that, so economic issues are more important for a government to address rather than other issues which pertain to different denominational aspects, because those can create more fissures in the society rather than lead to any unism or solidarity and harmony. So this point is very right. You are right, sir. And I believe that from my study of the religions of the world, not only one religion but other religions also, this has been always the concern of the prophets and the sages and the seers. And even, whosoever rulers were Ashoka, Akbar, and Zain al-Abidin, and almost all the pious rulers of the past and present, they've been always more concerned with mitigating the problems, especially economic problems of the people, rather than arousing such controversies which create more problems for people rather than solve even the existing problems. So I agree with you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Marazi. Thank you. Well, Professor Ghose, you want to reflect on this?
Thank you. In this context, I want to go back to the Constituent Assembly discussion when the Constitution of India was framed. And you will be surprised to know that Nehru and Ambedkar both were against entering the word secular into the preamble to the Constitution of India, right, because they were such great scholars. They were aware very much about the spirit of India. Even if we know that Ambedkar was suffered by the ritualistic Hinduism from his early childhood, and he suffered a lot, still he had some sub-corner for Hindutva, the Hinduness, the plurality of India. And in that Constituent Assembly discussion, when they rejected this, one from Professor K.T. Saha from Bihar, he was suggesting to enter, to include this word secular into the preamble. Now, then he was also challenged by one from our soil, from Odisha, Loknath Mishra. He was a member of the Constituent Assembly. He said that when you have given religious freedom through Article 15, then how can you enter secular into the, it's a very logical question. You have given that everybody should practice their own religion. Then what does secularism mean? Then why should secular be included into the preamble? So this was the debate. So I fully agree with Professor Hamidulla that in welfare state, this secular has no, the discussion on secular has no place, because this is just and afterwards, you see, the aftermath, you see, the modern inclusion, it is a post-emergency inclusion through the 42nd Amendment by Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Because after the emergency, she thought that actually she is the originator of all sorts of this problem in the political scenario of India. Because he was totally against the Sampurna Kranti of Jayaprakash Narayan. He put them all into the jail, and from that time onwards, she was thinking that she will create such a vote bank for her, who will vote the Congress party for all times to come. So in that way, we find in history that this, you see, during the Sahabano case and the Rajiv Gandhi period of Rajiv Gandhi and Narasimha Rao. So all these things, these were all masterminded by Indira Gandhi. And we all know the fate she met in her life. So India is basically secular. We need not discuss secularism in the socio-economic secularism. We need not discuss. It is already there. So that is what Ambedkar said, that our directive principles of state policy is so much complete that this spirit of secularism and spirit of the equality amongst the masses is already included there. So this is the scenario.
This is Dhammapada.
This is
Ambedkar Dhammapada gives more emphasis for a socio-cultural being reformation rather than religious reformation.
Dhammapada, you are referring to
Ambedkar Dhammapada, yeah.
Yes. Radhakrishnan himself wrote on this issue.
Yeah.
That this is the thing, that that is the situation. You see, you take the Aurobindo's philosophy, you take Tilak's philosophy. These days, you find that Savarkar is one of the, because somehow he was politically alienated with this murder of Gandhi, and ultimately, but you will be surprised to know Gandhi himself on different occasions wrote the mercy petition for Savarkar to make himself free from Annamanjan. This is the situation. And similarly, on secularism, issue of Hindutva, the Savarkar Ambedkar was very much in support of this view. He was against Hinduism, but he was not against Hindutva. My friend Dhaneshwar Sahu can enlighten us better on this issue.
Sir, I just want to share one point with you. This point that we are more secular if you are totally spiritual than religious. I have mentioned in my paper I have sent to Professor Rao for the Philo Family publication.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Section
Sir Shishadji,
yeah.
Professor Seshadri sir, I am doubtful about this.
Regarding?
Spiritualism, you become more secular with spiritualism.
No, please note, I have talked of spiritualism from an ethical perspective, not a religious perspective.
I absolutely agree, but it's altogether a different thing which cannot be put into words, I feel. I think this is
that I'm not sure, but I think each one of us can have a moral life that is spiritual.
Yeah, because
service to humanity.
Also has its own aura, it has its own nuances, which they rationally justify. I think being a very I am a very religious person.
Amit dear, we can debate on it at our convenience.
No, I just wanted to make clear because Rao sir, can I just...
You can speak, yeah. Sorry,
yes, carry on, madam, carry on.
Yeah, my point was that I just loved these two talks very much. And Hamid Saab, recently I presented a paper in your very prestigious seminar. I was very lucky that we chosen to be there.
Thank you.
My point, I am highly, I believe in mystical philosophy and theistic mystical philosophy, but I very much appreciate atheistic, philosophies, those who are highly ethical. It's a different stance, and I appreciate mystical philosophy, theistic mysticism more because I appreciate atheism. This is my point, and I think that is secular in Indian context. I have been very much worried regarding the word secularism associated with the word tolerance, because tolerance is a camouflaging of word for going on bearing injustice.
Yeah.
And in
right.
Indian context, this is what has happened gravely, because in the name of tolerance, excuse me for this, but the minorities have suffered a lot in the name of tolerance. And this is not what secularism means. Secularism means that it has to be acceptance, it has to be participation, and more importantly, patience, which is absolutely lacking in Indian secularism. This tolerance is nothing but just inflicting injustice on the minorities. This is what I feel. Your reactions, Seshadri sir, Hamid sir, Ghose sir.
Well, thank you, Amita madam, for your observation. Well, you have nicely said tolerance, as we often use, actually doesn't match to the very idea, the very spirit of secularism, because toleration means something, some sort of bearing something which we don't want to, but still we are with them. So tolerating means a sort of injustice is there, but still we are bearing with them.
Yes.
So that sort of negative implication this word tolerance has got. Rather, secularism should imply a sort of acceptance and mutual participation.
Yes,
that
yes,
would be
absolutely.
a more comprehensive definition for secularism, rather than tolerating each other would be a negative, would have a negative implication. Thank you very much. Well, we have with us. Yes, thank you, madam, for your observation. Well, Srinivasan Krishnamurthy sir wanted to ask something. Well, you want to ask, sir, or should I put it before the speakers? Well, Srinivasan Krishnamurthy sir wants to, he sees a need of uniform civil code in the country, and he sees, well, sir, you want to ask something? Yes, sir. Welcome, sir. Welcome.
You can just proceed, sir. No problem.
Yes, well, Srinivasan Krishnamurthy sir, he wants for a uniform civil code in the country, and Professor Ghose, I request Professor Ghose to reflect on this.
No, the thing is, thank you, Professor Krishnamurthy. The thing is that as a democratic country, and India is such a large democracy, we definitely want one uniform civil code, because the thing is, the opposite of accepting universal civil code, what happens? We are, instead of accepting that, that was the dream of Ambedkar. Ambedkar's dream was to arrive at a uniform civil code. But instead of doing that, we have accepted many personal laws of different religions. And that is why all the problems are coming from that. because in the name of minority appeasement, that is the main weapon with the politicians to catch the vote bank. And Indian society, as you know, it is stratified both horizontally and vertically. This religion aspect is there and caste aspect is also there. And these things we are every day witnessing in the news as it is happening in UP. How to the voters, how to catch, how to get votes from them. But all political parties are responsible, not that a particular group. That is why I told that when I wrote these two articles some 35 years back, National Integration, a Reality or Ideal, and Religion, Fundamentalism and Indian Culture. These two articles, from that day onwards till date, things have not changed much. At that time, the Congress party was there, and now the BJP is there. So the thing is, left-wing politicians were there, and now the right-wing politicians are here. So this competitive politicization, this is actually the problem in our country. Now, as Madam Amita ji was asking this question, I can bring this for our own discussion. When in the Supreme Court, the case was heard on the issue of Hindutva, and there this concept Triloko Vyapi. So this Triloko Vyapi concept, is it not a spiritual concept? How can it be a religious concept or a political concept? So we have to again inculcate the spirit of this, and you must be knowing, for that reason Aurobindo Ghosh sidetracked himself with all this political debate during the independence India. So because he had this spiritual element in him, and he tried to enforce that the Sanatan Dharma, in the Sanatan Dharma, that Rashtra Dharma and Swadharma are same. So that was Ambedkar, that was Aurobindo Ghosh. And this is how we find this concept. We have to again rethink on it, and again rethink on it. Because this is,
excuse me,
yeah.
Unfortunately, in the present scenario in our country, there's great lot of religious persecution than what we envisage about secularism in India. You can see whether it is east or west or north or south, wherever we go, we have a lot of problems. Now, as rightly pointed out by Professor Amita Valmiki about the minorities aspect, as well as the religious aspect, the political aspect is really dominating and driving us towards religious fundamentalism than secularism. Is that correct? Is that what you mean? That's what I will fail to understand that. Please.
If we ask Professor Marazi, he will also say this, that Islam never preaches all this sort of fundamentalist trend. That this fundamentalism, because of the Muslim fundamentalism, these days you are getting this Hindu, affable Hindu fundamentalism to counter the Muslim fundamentalism. Because the period in between this Congress rule, we have to bring the politics into the situation, political situation of the country into discussion, because we cannot leave it. From the day when it was entered, if we read India after Gandhi by Ramchandra Guha, then we will find not only this Article 42, which brings preamble the word secular, all the Article 38, 39, 40, that means Prime Minister is like a dictator, he will function like a dictator. So all these amendments were made during that period, just to see that country will run by a single party, and that is Congress party, and that is how we can say that the Nehru was a Democrat, but his daughter was not. And for that reason, you find all these things, and Rajiv Gandhi was dragged into politics. He was not interested, and you have seen what happened in this situation. So that is the thing. We cannot segregate. If we discuss secularism, we cannot segregate these issues, these incidences which took place in the post-independent area. So that is why I suggest better to do away with this term, because it is better to do away with this secular from the. I am with the. From the Professor Miraj, yes, from the political, socio-political situation, not this religious, spiritual situation that you suggest. We have to accept that spiritually, religiously, we ought to be secular. So that is the situation. But these people, they are forcing secularism, and that is why they are branded as pseudo-secularists. And you must have heard about Tariq Fateh and Taslima Nasreen. I have not mentioned their name because I don't enter into any political wrangle in this debate. Because Supreme Court debate was between and Shashi Tharoor. He also these days has started accepting Hindutva as an ideology. Even if he was against, because he said that it is monistic, it is monolithic, Hinduism is pluralistic, we accept Hinduism, not Hindutva, but gradually he is shifting towards that. And Ram Jethmalani, he has died, and he was the lawyer who was fighting for this concept, Hindutva, in the Supreme Court. So ultimately, Supreme Court decided that Hindutva is not anything, it is nothing to do with the religion Hinduism. Okay, so there should not be any conflict. So that is how in the recent article Dipankar Gupta says that gradually people are getting the spirit of Hindutva. They are becoming more and more in the side of Hindutva than Hinduism. These are the situations. We just cannot segregate these things. Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was not able to join because there was some connectivity issue. So if there was some question to me, because I could not hear that. So the debate is going nicely, but no, so far as the word secular is concerned, in the context, it has some meaning. And but in the Western context, I was talking in Western context. So I think that in situations where there are multi-religious societies, so there we need to reach to some consensus where there is non-interference in the religious affairs of any community. So we can use some word for that, maybe secularism or something else. So I don't think so there is any problem in that. So then you may have your religion, I may have my own religion. Lakum deenukum waliya deen, as has been said in Quran. For you, your religion. For my religion. For me, my religion. So, but some consensus has to be built on some word or some term which can give at least assurance to the minorities or other people that they are safe. They some other identity will not be imposed on them, and they will not be assimilated into some other identity. So this is needed. Some guarantees are needed, as I mentioned about Misaki Medina, and the Jews were afraid that they may just get assimilated with Muslims. But then there was Medina Constitution was written, and in which they were considered as part of the nation, one community. Ummah means community. So in this way, some understanding is to be reached between different groups when there is multicultural societies or when there are multi-faith societies. So there we have to give some guarantees. So there can be any term, maybe any other term, confederation or whatever you may call it. And if secularism is used in that sense, where it is non-interference in the religious affairs of any community, that there should be no issue for that, in my view.
No. You mean to say I accept the religious, spiritual meaning or connotation of secularism, but not this social and political connotation of secularism, because these are the creators of all trouble. The Ambedkar and Nehru, they felt this spiritual and religious aspect. Ambedkar himself said, he was, you see, when I made this distinction, hard secularism and soft secularism, Ambedkar was never against religion. he was against, he said that we cannot just discard religion. Religion will be there. But the problem is with Hinduism, and for which he suffered throughout his lifetime, and ultimately he switched over to Buddhism during the last phase of his life. So I think on these issues, my friend Professor Dhaneshwar Sahu, he is having a deep study on this, these thinkers of in the Indian independence and post-independence thinkers. He can enlighten us. Let us hear from
welcome.
him.
Welcome, Professor Sahu. Dhaneshwar Sahu, sir. Please be brief, sir. So and pinpointed questions so that we can discuss. Welcome,
Thank
Professor
you.
Sahu. Namaskar.
Thank you, friends. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Very much audible, sir. Audible.
So, I thank Professor Ghose and Professor Marazi, Professor Seshadri, and all other friends who participated in this discussion. Some questions come to my mind. I think we can give a negative definition of secularism. Somebody who is not a fundamentalist, somebody is not a communalist, he is at least to my mind a secular person. And of course, there is a conceptual difference between fundamentalism and communalism. A fundamentalist believes that whatever is said in his religious book, they are very fundamental. Some ideas are very fundamental to his religious framework. There is no conflict. But when he expresses intolerance, he expresses animosity, hatred towards people of other faith, he is communal. So in this respect, we can make a distinction between communalism and fundamentalism. But secularism is totally antithetical to fundamentalism and communalism. This is my one observation. And my second observation is the ideal of secularism is best reflected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was passed in United Nations in 1948. There are two famous documents. One is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and there is an international organization that is International Humanist and Ethical Union. If friends might be knowing, then the International Humanist and Ethical Union, it has issued a humanist manifesto, and it was chaired by Paul Kurtz, an American philosopher. And Paul Kurtz, when he was the chairman or president of International Humanist and Ethical Union, in his manifesto, humanist manifesto, he said, mankind is one, humanity is one. So on the basis of science, on the basis of rationalism, he said that rationalism and science can unite human society, but religion is a matter of segregation and it has to be abandoned with. That was his view or in some way. But the two documents, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Humanist Manifesto, are two best documents to understand secularism. And then my last conclusion is that according to sociological study, human society is passing through different phases. There was a pre-religious social order all over the world. Then there came the religious social order. Then came a secular social order. Now, as Professor Seshadri was saying, humanity is marching towards a post-religious society. And in the post-religious society, religion will have nothing to do with your personal life, with your marriage, with your food, anything else. So humanity is marching towards a post-religious social order where internationalism, cosmopolitanism, globalism, and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, these will be the guiding values of humanity. This is my observation and this is my idea about secularism. About Ambedkar, I have read some of his works, and Ambedkar was totally against the Hindu way of life because it is founded on discrimination, it is founded on inequality, and perhaps it is the only religion and its religious scriptures which have justified the caste system, which have justified the Varna system. Take Vedas in the Purusha Sukta, that the Varna system is sanctified. And in the Bhagavad Gita, the 4 Varnas, that is sanctified. So as long as we are attached to these ideas, perhaps we cannot think of a humanistic ideal that man is above everything. And so Ambedkar's vision of secularism, though it is not incorporated in Constitution, he has his own conviction of Hinduism, and perhaps people make a distinction between Hinduism and Hindutva. But what is the basic foundation of Hindutva? I think, to my mind, the foundation comes from the Hindu aspect, but the liberal aspect of Hinduism. Hindutva cannot stand without Hinduism, but the liberal aspect of Hinduism, the Gandhian approach of Hinduism, that will give rise to the idea of Hindutva. Hindutva cannot have any meaning without Hinduism. This is my submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sahu. Well, I agree with the first 3 points, but I totally disagree with the Varna concept that you have brought in from the Bhagavad Gita. Well, Varna system that Bhagavad Gita talks of, or the Purusha Sukta high in the Rig Veda, they are not discriminatory. They talk of the Trigunas that we have, the Sattva, Raja and the Tama gunas that we have. The more is the Sattva, you are a Brahman. The more is the Raja guna in you, you are a Kshatriya. Okay, so even the Tamasic guna is also required. A sort of inactivity is required. A sort of rest is required. So the conscious mix, the mix in you, the gunas in you, that makes you a Brahman, not by birth. Bhagavad Gita doesn't make a Varna distinction by birth. It is by the gunas that you have. Okay, so
can there be any criteria to determine who has Brahminical abilities, who has Kshatriya abilities?
Yes.
Women? Can we include women? To what category will they belong?
You talk of Valmiki, you talk of many people who have come from the lower Varnas that you talk of. They are Brahmins because of their Sattva guna. So Bhagavad Gita preaches that. We have taken this, and Gandhiji has made it clear. Gandhiji, in his philosophical, well, he's not a philosopher, but in his exposition, he has made this point clear, that the Varna distinction that we take Varna by birth should be discarded. It is what Varna by birth. It is Varna by your practice, your way of living, your gunas. So that way I totally disagree, but the other 3 points, they're excellent. And I totally agree on you that secularism is antithetical to communalism and fundamentalism. I totally agree. And other points, the humanistic approach that the Humanist Manifesto and UNDP declaration, that I totally agree. But this Varna distinction that you carry from Bhagavad Gita, I totally disagree, because it doesn't preach a distinction, it doesn't preach a discrimination, it talks of the gunas in us. You can be a Brahmin, you may be born in a family that may be called, say, Sudra, but you can be elevated to a Brahman. So that is the message from Bhagavad Gita. You should not confuse with that. Thank you. Well, we have
one observation, please.
Yes.
Why Karno had all the abilities of a Kshatriya. Karno was really a Kshatriya, but his Kshatriya identity was not known. Therefore, he has been thoroughly, throughout his life, he has been humiliated. This is one instance. Ekalavya had all the abilities of a Kshatriya, but Ekalavya was not given education. So there cannot be any standard by which we can decide who is a Kshatriya, who is a Vaishya, who is a Brahmin. This is totally impossible. This is from the perspective of Ambedkar. If you read his Annihilation of Caste, if you read his book, other books, then perhaps he is the person who has made a thorough study of the Vedic system, and the Gita system, and he has thoroughly analyzed the contradictions, the inconsistencies of Gita and the Vedic literature. It is from the side of Ambedkar. What I said is not my view, my friends. These views come from the writings of Ambedkar, about whom Dr. Ranjit Ghose refers so much.
Well, there was an Ambedkar Gandhi debate on this issue, but I support the Gandhian view, who is more holistic and more. I see the Varna distinctions that we talk of and the explanations that Gandhiji makes on this. That Varna should not be decided by Varna should be decided by the gunas that one carries, the way one lives. Okay, one may be born in a Kshatriya family or a Sudra family, well, by birth I say, but he can elevate to a Brahmana. And that is the message which Gandhiji even speaks of. Well, we have with us Professor Pramod Kumar Das. Well, he is working on
just Dr. Rao.
Yes.
One thing in this context I'm mentioning, and Professor Sahu must be knowing this. And when Ambedkar was almost, he was so much angry with the Hinduism and because he suffered a lot from the standpoint of, if we take the ritualistic Hinduism. So he was about to put into ashes the Manusmriti. And on Gandhi's insistence, he stopped that practice, to stop that work. And therefore, Gandhi, you see, all those thinkers of that period, we just cannot think them in isolation. Gandhi, Savarkar and Ambedkar, there should be a comparative study on their philosophical standpoints, because on some points they meet and on some other points they differ. So this is the thing I was about to add to the discussion. Thank you, Professor Das. May continue.
Thank you, Professor Ghose. Well, Professor Das. Well, Pramod Kumar Das, sir. Well, welcome. Well, you are working on Bhagavad Gita. Well, on this issue and the entire idea of secularism. Well, your comments and your questions, please. Welcome. Your microphone is off.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. I enjoyed both the talks delivered by great speakers, Dr. Ghose and Dr. Marazi. One thing that disturbed me personally, that some words are understood by us in a very narrow sense. For example, when we are talking about spiritualism and the word tolerance, when we are interpreting these terms and we are giving the connotations to these terms, I think that is not the holistic approach. Spiritualism does not mean that it is an atheistic approach, that one should believe in God, one should believe in spirit. Etymologically, from spirit, it is spiritual. No, this is not the way of understanding. One may not believe in self, one may not believe in God, one may not believe in religion, but he can be spiritual. I agree with Professor Seshadri. Spiritual does not mean that we should belong to a religious order. We should believe in the Supreme Self. We should believe in Brahman. We should believe in God. No. Spiritualism means to have a highly evolved consciousness. It is not even the mysticism, that somebody believes in the mystic state. No. Spiritualism means there is no sense of discrimination, non-discriminative consciousness, all-inclusive acceptance. Materialism is not a problem for spiritualism. Real spiritualists accept materialism, because without matter, man cannot exist. Without body, man cannot exist. So when we speak about soul, Brahman, we don't negate body, we don't negate matter. Any negation is not there, not accepted in spiritualism. There is no negation. Spiritualism is not the negation of materialism. It is a misconception. Spiritualism means the higher consciousness. And we all are marching towards that day by day. That is education. That is culture. We are getting education day by day because we are getting transformation. We are getting transformed. Knowingly or unknowingly, we are reaching that state. We are marching towards that perfection. That is spiritualism. That I should have an ability to accept all, myself and the other, the thesis and antithesis, even just the opposite also. Something is opposite to me, but I have that ability to accept that. Therefore, Vasundhaiva Kutumbakam. When we say Vasundhaiva Kutumbakam, here we don't speak about Islam. Here we don't speak about Hinduism. Here we don't speak about Christianity. Here we don't speak about any Varna, caste. Entire world is one family. If one has this type of consciousness, he is a spiritualist. Buddha is a spiritualist. But Buddha does not believe in the self. Buddha does not believe in God. So spiritualism should not be misinterpreted as the belief in a God, as the belief in a spirit. No. Spiritualism is that holistic approach that is a higher level of consciousness which includes all discriminations. It is non-discriminative. Second is tolerance. Tolerance does not mean tolerance of injustice. It is the misuse of tolerance. Nobody is advised to tolerate the injustice. Tolerance means I have my privilege, you have your privilege, I should not be envious of your privilege. I should not be disturbed by your privilege.
Hello.
I should not interfere with your privilege. That Dr. Marazi also said very... Mute karo. Dr. Marazi very beautifully said, non-interference is secularism. And the same thing is said by Dr. Ghose, acceptance is secularism. I don't think any difference. Acceptance in the sense of religious sense, and non-interference in the political sense, both connote the same thing. When we can believe in non-interference, when we land in a higher level of consciousness, when we can believe in universal acceptance, when we land in that higher consciousness. So landing in the higher consciousness is spiritualism. Irrespective of a caste, irrespective of a color, irrespective of citizenship, irrespective of any discrimination, any difference. So tolerance does not mean the tolerance of injustice. No, where it is. If it is there, it is a misuse of tolerance. There are some occasions we are bound to tolerate, otherwise we can't exist. It is an existential question. We should know the art of tolerating. Otherwise we can't exist. Very simply, it can be interpreted. You have your privilege, I have my privilege. You have your religion, I have my religion. You have your personal belief, I have my personal belief. You should not interfere with me in my affairs, and I should not interfere in your affairs. If I am disturbed by your privilege, if I am not tolerating your privilege, that is very, very bad culture. one should tolerate the other. That means one should respect the other. One should respect the diversity. If this theme is understood, then one can claim that his wisdom is secular. Secular is a state of consciousness. When we brand secularism in the name of religion, in the name of spiritualism, there is a point of misinterpretation. Yes. But secularism has been used as a tool in politics. Political leaders and the government, they have used secularism for the political purpose. So it has become a political tool. It has become a political asset for vote bank or for any purpose. For any diplomacy, for any state affair, they are using this tool. That is a second order activity. The first order activity is that one should land in the higher consciousness, that then one can accept the entire globe as one family. You are my brother. If you are a Muslim, not that you are different from a Hindu. So don't claim that I am a Hindu. The moment I say I am Hindu, when Dr. Ghose is saying that Hinduism is so and so, he is not saying Hinduism as a category. He is defining the term Hindu in this way. Suppose we don't utter the word Hinduism. Take it X. X is a variable. If that word X connotes this idea, that is secularism. So it is not that we utter the word Hindu 1,000 times. That does not mean that we become Hindu. If I claim that I am Hindu, I am not secular. If I claim that I am a Muslim, I am not secular. If I claim that I am a Christian, I am not secular. I am a man. I am a human being. Humanity is my religion. Humanity is my culture.
Sir,
be a Muslim.
Be brief, sir. We can take...
No, this is my submission. This is my submission. So spiritualism should not be misinterpreted, and tolerance should not be misinterpreted. So secular is a secular feelings, secular understanding, and secular way of living is not a matter of Hinduism, it's not a matter of Islamism, it is a matter of Christianity, it is a matter of humanity. It is the higher level of consciousness which everybody should imbibe. This is my submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Das, for your observations. But I go with the format of Dr. Almita Valmiki as regarding the terminology of tolerance. Well, saying I tolerate your religion, it's a negative connotation. Rather than I say I respect your religion. So that is more forward-looking. I tolerate your religion means some negative implication is there. But I don't want your religion, but I tolerate you somehow. So that sort of implication it has. So better it would be if we are discussing secularism, I respect your religion would be a better format on this. Well, we have with us Dr. Kailash Chandra Das, very senior professor in the state. Well, if he wants to say, make some observation or some question in his mind, he is welcome. If he has got some. He's a senior professor of a state. If he wants to say something on the entire issue, well, I respect what Professor Das has said, and very nicely has said he has tried to bring about a parity in the thought in the entire scheme. Well, one thing comes to my mind here, actually, as Professor Marazi has said, that philosophically speaking, religion and politics, they do belong to different areas, and there should be separation. There should be always, the philosophers have thought of separating religion from politics. But what happens is, there is a conscious mix, I say conscious mix of religion with politics, and notoriously the word secular is introduced to bring in confusion between the people and people, and keep the people at the crossroads and keep them at a conflicting attitudes rather than liberating them. So this very mix of religion with politics is dangerous in any society, and as long as religion and politics do not stay separate, whatever ideologies that you bring in, there would be a problem in establishing a respect, a sort of a mutual understanding of each other. So the separation of religion from politics, and that is the root cause of all the problems, all the conflicting attitudes that we have in the society. If you give away with that, maybe we can have a better world, a better society. Thank you all. Well, if anybody wants to say something, has some issue to speak on, well, they are invited. We have professors with us. Anybody, if they're interested, something on the, well, I don't see, well, I'll wait for half a minute. If somebody wants to say something, add to this issue or make some personal observations on the entire issue, they are welcome.
May I say something? Just one sentence.
Yes, Professor Sesadri, yes.
Yeah, religion should be within our homes, not for public display or public activity. Thank you.
I could not get you, sir. I could not hear you proper.
What I said is that religion should be within our homes, not a public activity.
Yes. So religion should be purely a private affair. It should not be brought into the public domain. So this is the message from Professor Sesadri, and the message is contained in both the talks. The separation of religion as a private affair and politics is a public affair, and religion, which is purely private, should not be brought in to the public arena, and secularism should not be introduced therein to create more confusion. So if you do with this, maybe we can have a better ideology, a better thinking, a better thought process. Thank you all. Thank you both professors. Well, if we have this Dr. No, well, he's not there. Sir, I Professor Pramod Madas. Yes, Pramod. Yes, sir. Well, we don't have Dr. Kailas Mahana, sir. Well, he's busy somewhere. Well, so at first, I would like to thank Dr. Ghose for his views on secularism and his suggestions to dissolve this conflict arising from the very idea of secularism. He has made certain suggestions. Maybe that would be very helpful in understanding the true spirit of secularism. What I could see from the entire talk of Professor Ghose is that the introduction of the word secular is itself notorious. What he feels is the spirit of secularism is already contained in the entire the constitution speaks of secularism. There was no necessity of making an amendment in the form of 42nd Amendment and to bring in secular in the preamble, to incorporate secular in the preamble. So that's why he talks of people making PILs to get rid of this word secular from the preamble. So this is the message, and he's not comfortable with such an introduction, because the very format of the Indian Constitution it speaks of, it has a secular spirit. So, well, I thank Professor Ghose for his observation, and maybe his observation carries forward. Let's see. I don't know. But and coming to Professor Marazi, very nicely has done. He has tried to see the secular format, secularism, the idea of secularism from a philosophical angle, from the ancient to the modern times. And what nice thing that I could see is he is more concerned with the worldly affairs, with the human values, rather than the religious and the so-called spiritual values, where there is a lot of confusion. When you talk of religion, when you talk of spirituality, a lot of confusion comes in, and we forget about the social world, where we have enough problems to solve, and we forget that. And we point out to something that is unknown, unseen, and we fight over that. We have this faith, you have that faith, and you create a controversy out of nothing. I'm not sure what is there in the other world. You are never sure what is in the other world. Nobody is sure. But we are at least sure that we are in the world and we have certain problems. And we need to solve those problems. And That understanding is somehow lacking in us. So that needs to be understood, and that's why Professor Marazi rightly points out secularism should be a worldly affair. It should not be mixed with a religious or a spiritual affair. It should be humanistic in its approach. Then only the word secularism justifies what it means. So thank you, Professor Marazi, for seeing this issue from a perspective. Sir. Yes, welcome, sir. Welcome. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Dr.
Well, we can say in one sentence that spiritual is more extensive than religious. That is what.
Absolutely.
That is not.
I would like to add that I would like to add that unless and until religiosity is graduating to spirituality, it has no value at all. So this I will add. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can make any stipulation on spiritualism.
More mature.
We can make any stipulation. We don't go by reportive definitions. We are free to make any stipulation. We can define spiritualism. We can define tolerance in our own way. So first of all, we must go by the standard meanings, not making any stipulations of our choice or of our belief. That is my submission.
While living in this world, we can be spiritual, no doubt in that. All right. And we have to be spiritual in this world, not in another world. So to be spiritual and not harm anyone, that is to be also spiritual. So, and that is the best spirituality. To be in this world, but not harm anyone.
Only one
so that is the best.
To be spiritual is to be human and to be humane.
Celebrate the diversity in Indian context,
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Ghose. Well, if you talk of Buddha, the question will come whether was he spiritual or not. He did not believe in the ideas of God, the ideas of soul. He did not believe in the metaphysical. So he was more concerned with the social problems, and we do consider him as spiritual. So it is an elevation of standard that what Professor Das wants to point out. Spirituality is the achievement of highest level of consciousness. Well, that consciousness, you elevate to the other world, you see, you elevate to the other world, but you do come back to this world to live in this world, which Professor Marazi was pointing out. So in spirituality, there is an elevation to come back to this world, to see this world in that spiritual light. And that justifies spirituality. And not that you get elevated and you vanish. That is not spirituality. Well, if I take Professor Marazi and your views, well, spirituality is elevation in the consciousness. If at all that elevation is not this worldly, as I say, otherworldly, if at all that is otherworldly, we don't know what is that. And if it is that, if the traditional definition goes that if you elevate to that height and you come back to this world to be to follow the worldly issues, you are really spiritual because you see no difference in the other. So that would be the right perspective, which I see. Well, you may disagree. Okay, I see the otherworldly and the worldly. I don't deny any world. I don't deny any world. Yes, thank you. Yes, it is one for 2 minutes more. Well, it was a nice discussion. Professor Das has added to this. So spirituality does not necessarily mean otherworldly. Well, though it has an implication to the other world, Buddha was spiritual without reference to the other world. So that may be the idea. And what Professor Maraji has pointed out, we can elevate to that height to come back to this world, to live in this world, to solve these worldly problems. So that would again account to what is called spirituality, and that I hope would be a balanced position with both the speakers. I think would agree. And thank you both speakers, Professor Ghose, for your enlightening lecture, and also Professor Maraji for seeing this issue from a philosophical standpoint. I request both the speakers to send their articles for publication in the next issue of Philosophy Family. So I thank both the speakers for making this evening so beautiful, and I'm thankful to all for we are able to close this meeting in time. It is 8:45. Well, as scheduled, we are able to close this meeting. So I could thank all the participants. I should thank Amita Valmiki for redefining tolerance. I should thank her for redefining tolerance, and that has really inspired me, that definition. And also thank Krishnamurti sir, Professor Dhaneshwar Sahu sir, and Professor Sesadri sir, and Professor Pramod Das, and all others who participated in the discussion and made this discussion so lively. I never thought we had a webinar on secularism a few weeks back, and I thought it would be a repetition and it would add no value to this entire structure. Well, I think my assumption was wrong, because I learned a lot from this webinar. This was the last webinar on secularism. I should thank both the speakers for making this evening so beautiful, so nice, and also thank all the participants for making this webinar so successful. So I should thank all for participating, for interacting, and making this webinar so successful. So
Thank you also, sir.
Thank you so much.
Sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I thanking everybody.
Thank you all.
I request Professor Ghose to declare the meeting closed. I thank Dhaneshwar Sahu sir and everyone who are involved, who raised beautiful questions and who made this discussion well. There is always a possibility to oppose, and when there is no opposition, there will be no discussion. So more is the opposition, and that opposition should be constructive, and that is the ideal. That is the idea that we carry in Philosophy Family. We need opposition. It is only when there is opposition, a constructive opposition, something new would turn up, something new would emerge. So that is the idea behind the entire discussion. So thank you everybody for making this evening so lively, so successful. Thanks everybody. So over to Professor Das to declare this meeting closed.
Thank you, sir.